The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to the Lord. In those days, when there again was a great crowd without anything to eat, Jesus summoned the disciples and said, "My heart is moved with pity for the crowd, because they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will collapse on the way, and some of them have come a great distance." His disciples answered him, "Where can anyone get enough bread to satisfy them here in this deserted place?" Still, he asked them, "How many loaves do you have?" They replied, 7. He ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then, taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to distribute, and they distributed them to the crowd. They also had a few fish. He said the blessing over them and ordered them distributed also. They ate and were satisfied. They picked up the fragments left over, 7 baskets. There were about 4,000 people. He dismissed the crowd and got into the boat with his disciples and came to the region of Dalmanutha. The Gospel of the Lord. Yeah, it's a great little gospel passage we have here. No doubt you'll remember from just a couple chapters previous the feeding of 5,000. So it's a little bit of deja vu, and perhaps the disciples seem to do a little bit better this time, but they're perhaps more attuned with Jesus, what he wants to do. They're more ready perhaps to show compassion and the like, but there are some parallels. When we put the two stories in parallel, we get some details. We get some details like the number of wicker baskets left over, and then we ask, how is Mark recounting the story, or perhaps how is St. Peter recounting the story? As St. Mark gets a lot of the details of what he records from the preaching of St. Peter. But how is he retelling the story in such manner to alert us to the differences? You could say, well, here, and some people have offered that the 7 baskets here represent the 70 nations. The 70 nations, with some understanding of these, these are the Gentile nations, whereas the 12 wicker baskets before were representative of the 12 tribes of Israel. And of course, Jesus performed the miracle in the region in the northern region of Israel, and here more in pagan territory. The difficulty is that, even say like the region of Galilee, it's Jewish territory, but there are pagans in there as well. And then Jesus is working, we saw, north of that region and then down into the 10 cities or the Decapolis. And that's more pagan territory. We see that he's taken that brief excursion. Yeah, he has that brief excursion. And but there are Jews there as well. So it's, we draw up the symbolic accounts, right? We to some extent give the meaning, or like a little bit of flavor or something like that. We're kind of grasping at the details, and perhaps the biggest thing to take note of the fact that it happened. It's like, okay, well this happened, and it happened there, and this is how it all transpired. And can we hold on to that story for ourselves, right? Can we ourselves in our following Jesus, enter into the story so as to be so as to have our faith inflamed by what Jesus does. There's always so much going on in the Gospel of Mark. In 10 verses, he's packed a lot in here, and this is likewise, I think, this is just part of the reality of God. If we want to talk about packing a lot in, well, that's what God does, right? It's like this is in knowing the nature of God, knowing that God is pure self-gift, knowing that God is totally for the other, we ought not be surprised at the fact that there are two feedings, 4,000 and 5,000. We shouldn't be surprised at that. We should be surprised that there aren't more of them. You know, that he's not going out always feeding. Except for the fact that, of course, Jesus wants his disciples to grow in maturity, and he wants the people who are now being claimed for his kingdom movement being drawn to Jesus to give right and worthy praise to God and live lives of service, of blessing to the world, that he wants them to grow to full maturity. And if you had Jesus just walking around feeding people all the time, that's all they'd ever be thinking about, like what's coming next here. Or it would be worse, because we have some understanding of what happened in the wilderness for 40 years when God was feeding his people day and night. They just start grumbling because they want something else, right? Because they are led by their stomachs. Not that you are, right? They are led by their stomachs. So all of this is going on in the passage. But how is it that Jesus invites here his people to grow to full stature, as it were? Well, he has them with him share in becoming sensitive to the needs of the people. This is not the beginning of our Christian walk, right? The beginning of our Christian walk is to be close to Jesus. But the closer we are to Jesus, the more sensitive we are to the needs of the world, the needs of the people around us. And then as we are close to Jesus, and how do we do that? We accomplish this closeness, or God accomplishes this closeness for us in prayer, in sacrament. Right? He does in fact feed us with his own life of love. We're drawing close to him all the time. We're to pray always, St. Paul says, always be mindful of God, always have hearts and lives that center on God and are given over to his purposes, over and against my purposes, over and against the world's purposes, over and against the purposes of the devil. Right? We're given over to God and his purposes. And living day by day or moment to moment with Jesus, then he awakens in us where the demands of love lead us, right? So he awakens in us the needs of the people. And even in the passage, right, he calls the disciples to himself, and he says, my heart is moved with pity for the crowd. So it's not that we go out and look at what we need to do, but it's our being with Jesus that then makes us sensitive to the promptings of his Spirit that is alive at work in us and working through us, so that he can show us what needs there are, the needs of the crowd, the needs of the people, the needs of the people that he entrusts to our care. Because he's already done this, of course. They've been with me for 3 days. Can you imagine? They've been with Jesus for 3 days and they have nothing to eat. So, and then the disciples answer, you can't get enough bread out here for them. It's not gonna happen. What do you have? Jesus says. So this is the exchange of prayer, right? We bring our hearts before the Lord. He alerts us to the need, and then we say we can't do it. That's a desperate need that you've alerted me to, Lord, and I can't do it. I can't do much about that. I can't do anything about that. He says, no, can you not? What do you have? Then you say, here, this is what I have. It's my heart and my life. It's not nearly enough to meet the need that you've revealed to me. And he says, okay, give it to me, and we'll do it. And then, now look, this is the thing, right? It's like when Jesus alerts us to the need and calls us to give ourselves to it, give ourselves in the cause of love, right? To whatever it is he's asking us to whatever it is he's making us sensitive to, whatever it is he's alerting us to. When he asks us to give, it's on him what he has and doesn't have. Do you know? It's his problem. If I don't have enough to meet the need, that's his problem. Because I'm not saying it like cheeky, do you know? Like, he's at the center, and he's the center all the way through. He has alerted you to the need. He's drawn you to himself. He's alerted you to the need. He's called you to give everything to it, and then that's it. Because it's his plan. It's his work. It's not yours. It's not. See, like there's a really subtle shift that can happen in us when we start to give our lives in the cause of Christ. Is like we can look at the work that he's given us and have that become central to us. But that's not to happen. As though like I take that on and then my successes and failures are mine. And then I'm really flying high when I've got all these successes in what he's called me to do. And I'm really low when I'm not hitting the marks. You've just made yourself the center of the story. Through that work that he's entrusted to you. So you can't make an idol even of the work that Jesus has entrusted to us. We have to keep him at the center. And then he keeps on enlivening us for the task or tasks that he's called us to. And the successes and failures are his. And lo and behold, he doesn't fail, you know. So it's like he's going to win. But he's going to win. He wins in us when we continue to make him the center and refuse to push ourselves in the middle there. And this is a lot of what's going on. And lo and behold, of course, when we find that we are given over totally to him and his purposes, then our efforts are multiplied. And somehow the needs of the crowd are met because he's made it so in us. And so it's simply ours to continue to give ourselves to him, to come before him, to be freed from self-concern. I don't know. I don't like to get harsh on these things. Self-absorption, self-centeredness. Right? We're freed from that as we give our hearts and our lives to God through and with and in the perfect praise of his Son here at the altar. And giving ourselves over to him, we receive now our daily bread. We receive now our provision. We receive now the food that God wants to give to us, that we will turn around and make available for the world, that we will turn around and pour out for the world. And so we receive the bread of life, Jesus himself, so that we can be the bread of life for his world.